Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you is going to pull at a place inside you most people spend a lifetime trying to ignore. It begins quietly, like any love story, but ends with a truth every man needs to understand if he ever wants to build something real. She was radiant once, not because she fit some magazine version of beauty, but because she trusted him. She laughed like life owed her nothing, loved like she had everything. And when he slipped that ring on her finger, she believed she had found a home. But the real test of love has nothing to do with the day you say, I do. It begins the second life becomes imperfect. Months after their wedding, she gained a little weight. Not much, just the kind that comes from feeling safe, exhaling after years of keeping her guard up. She didn't think twice about it. Why would she? She was married to the man who promised forever. But forever, in his mind, came with conditions. Suddenly, the same hips he once touched with reverence became too much. The softness he once traced at night turned into fuel for his shame. He didn't talk to her with the voice of a partner. He talked to her like a judge. At dinners, his words would stab quiet. A comment about her plate, a joke about her size, a passing remark about other women who take care of themselves. He thought it was harmless. He thought shame was motivation. He thought love needed to be earned. But here's the truth most men never learn. A woman does not stay because she is impressed. She stays because she feels safe. See, when a man humiliates the woman he claims to love, he's really revealing a wound inside himself, a fear that she might leave unless he keeps her small, a fear that he is not enough unless he makes her feel like less. So he points to her body as the problem when the sickness is in his insecurity. And the tragedy is that she began believing him. She thought she ruined everything. She thought she lost value. She blamed her reflection instead of questioning his character. Because when shame comes from the person you trust most, it becomes a whisper that sounds like truth. If you were her friend, what would you tell her? Would you say his love was real? Or would you tell her that real love never weaponizes vulnerability? Tell me in the comments. What would you do? And if this spoke to you, like, share, and subscribe. Someone you know needs to hear this. He didn't always treat her this way. In the beginning, he looked at her like she was the last miracle left on earth. He bragged about her smile, her mind, the way she could make a quiet room feel alive. He held her hand like it was priceless. And maybe that's what confuses men the most. How someone they once adored becomes someone they feel entitled to criticize. When she started gaining a little weight, just a softness life naturally brings, he felt something unfamiliar, fear. Not fear of losing her, fear of how others would judge him for being with her, because his love was never rooted in connection, it was rooted in image. He thought her body was an accessory, something to display, a reflection of his worth. So when it changed, he panicked. Not because he stopped loving her, but because he never learned what real love meant. And she felt it, the shift. It wasn't loud, it was subtle. He stopped taking pictures with her, stopped inviting her out, stopped complimenting her. She became a shadow trailing behind his ego, night after night. She stood in the bathroom with the door locked, staring at her reflection, tracing every curve he criticized, trying to understand how something so small could unravel everything she thought was secure. She pinched at her skin, wondering when she stopped being enough. But here's what men fail to see. When you shame a woman for her body, you're not motivating her. You're teaching her she's unworthy of love when she's human. And it always starts the same. A joke masked as humor. A suggestion masked as care. A comparison masked as curiosity. But every word cuts deeper than you think. She smiled to keep peace, yet every laugh felt heavier than the last. He didn't notice she stopped eating full meals when he was around. He didn't notice she avoided mirrors. He didn't notice the way her voice got quieter, like she was slowly apologizing for existing, because his attention was never on her pain. It was on maintaining control. Men like this hide behind standards, but what they're really hiding is weakness, a quiet insecurity that whispers, if she realizes she's valuable, she won't need me. So he keeps shrinking her with shame, hoping she never sees her worth. But the truth men must learn is this: when you make a woman feel small, You lose the only version of her that could have loved you unconditionally. If you're watching this, have you ever judged someone for changing instead of asking what they were going through? Share your thoughts below. Someone needs your honesty. There was a night, quiet, ordinary, the kind that should have been filled with warmth. She slipped into her wedding dress, the dress she once felt unstoppable in, just to remember who she used to be. The fabric didn't zip all the way, and she stood there, frozen, watching her past self disappear in the mirror. He walked in, saw her struggling, and instead of helping, he laughed. A soft, cutting laugh, the type that doesn't echo in the room, only inside your bones. He said, "You really let yourself go." Just like that. 5 cheap words strong enough to break a woman who carried everything else with grace. She tried to smile, pretending it didn't hurt, but her chest tightened like the room itself was shrinking. He didn't reach for her. He didn't ask what she needed. He just walked out, proud of the damage he'd done. And here's the truth nobody warns men about. A woman remembers everything. She remembers the laughter that held her and the silence that crushed her. She remembers kind hands and the ones that never reached back. She remembers the moment she realized her partner wasn't her protector, but her critic. Now listen carefully. When a man shames the woman he loves, it doesn't just bruise her confidence, it rewires her identity. She starts to believe her value is conditional, conditional on beauty, conditional on thinness, conditional on perfection, conditional on never changing. But human love demands evolution. Our bodies shift, life moves, time doesn't ask permission. He thought her weight gain was the problem, but the real weight was the expectation that she must remain unchanged to be loved. He forgot that vows aren't made to who someone is in a moment, they're made to who they become over a lifetime. And men, if you base your love on permanence, you'll lose every woman who trusts you, because the one thing guaranteed in life is change. So the question is never, will she change? It's, will you love her through it? She started avoiding social gatherings, not because she was embarrassed of her body, but because she was embarrassed of how he would look at her. That empty, disappointed gaze, like she'd stolen something from him. It's painful how quickly admiration can turn into evaluation. This wasn't about health, this wasn't about concern, this was about power, the power to decide when she was enough. But here's where the story begins to shift. Pain is a teacher, cruel but honest. And eventually, the lesson becomes louder than the hurt. Heartbreak doesn't always come from cheating. Sometimes it comes from the person who promised to protect you but taught you to fear yourself instead. Before we continue, tell me this in the comments. Do you believe love should stay loyal to the body or the soul? Everything changed the day she stopped asking, "What's wrong with me?" and started asking, "What's wrong with how he loves?" It didn't happen all at once. Growth rarely does. It began with a single thought, quiet, fragile, but real. I deserve to feel safe in my own skin. One afternoon, she met an old friend for coffee, someone who remembered her before the wedding, before the shame. Her friend looked at her, not through a lens of judgment, but with genuine curiosity. "You seem different," she said gently. And for the first time in months, she didn't try to fake a smile. She just lowered her eyes and whispered, "He doesn't look at me the same anymore." Her friend didn't respond with quick fixes or empty words. She simply asked, "Does he love you? Or does he love how others see him when he stands next to you?" That question settled in her heart like a seed. It grew, slowly, quietly, but powerfully. When she went home that night, she watched him, not with fear, but with clarity. She noticed how he only complimented her when others were around, how his affection had a spotlight, and when the room was empty, so was he. She remembered their early days, when he'd look at her like she was the world. But now she understood. He only loved the version of her that made him look valuable. His love wasn't devotion, it was validation. The more she saw, the more she realized how much she'd shrunk to fit his approval, how she'd starved, not just her body, but her spirit, how she'd apologized for taking up space in a world she was meant to fill. One evening, she stood in front of the mirror, same reflection, different eyes. She touched her skin, the same skin he criticized. And she thought, this body has carried me through every storm. Why am I letting someone who cannot love himself decide its worth? And that's the moment men don't see coming. When a woman stops believing she's the problem, she stops accepting small love. Because here's the truth. A woman's confidence doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from remembering who she was before the world told her otherwise. And once she remembers, you can shame her, you can criticize her, you can call her less, but it won't reach her heart anymore. She began doing small things, waking up early just to breathe, going on walks alone, cooking meals she enjoyed, not the ones he approved of. She wore clothes that made her feel alive. She laughed at her own jokes, not waiting for his validation, and slowly the woman she thought she lost began returning. He noticed. Men always do. When a woman starts loving herself again, he feels the ground shift. He tried to regain control, more comments, more criticism, more pressure. But this time, his words no longer held power. Because once a woman sees the truth, that love built on conditions is not love, she stops chasing it. And here's what every man must understand. You can lose a good woman long before she walks away. You lose her the moment she realizes her worth isn't in your opinion, but in her own reflection. Let me ask you this. Have you ever held on to someone not because you loved them, but because you feared who you'd be without control? The night everything finally broke was quiet, almost too quiet. No shouting, no dramatic scene, just a truth so heavy it could no longer be ignored. She had made dinner, his favorite, not to earn his love, but to give herself one last chance to see if there was anything left. He came home late, barely looked at her, scrolling through his phone, laughing at strangers online, while the woman who once made him feel alive sat inches away, silent, invisible. She placed a plate in front of him. He didn't thank her. He barely looked. Just raised an eyebrow and said, "Maybe you should skip a few meals, for your own good." This time, she didn't cry. She didn't defend herself. She didn't shrink. She simply looked at him, calm, steady, and said, "For whose good? Mine, or your image?" He froze, because for the first time, she wasn't playing small. She wasn't begging him to love her. She was asking him to reveal who he truly was. He scoffed, trying to pretend her strength didn't shake him. But it did, because men who rely on control are terrified of quiet courage. They know they can win against fear, but not against self-respect. She looked around the home they built, the photos, the memories, the promises, and she felt no attachment, because nothing in that house held her anymore. Not his words, not his vows, not the idea of who he might become. She realized she'd been loving a version of him that never existed. She stood up, walked to the bedroom, and began to pack, not with sadness, but with clarity. And here's the truth most men don't understand until it's too late. A woman doesn't leave when she's tired of trying. She leaves when she's tired of hurting. When she walked toward the door, he followed her, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of losing his comfort, fear of losing someone to blame, fear of facing himself. He tried to guilt her. "You're giving up on us." But she knew better. There was no us. There was her, fading, and him, watching. She looked him in the eyes and said, "I didn't change. I grew. You just refused to grow with me." That's when his voice cracked, because deep down, he knew the truth. He didn't lose her because she gained weight. He lost her because he couldn't carry the weight of loving someone fully. She walked out, not knowing exactly where she would go, but knowing she would never return to a place where love was measured by inches and pounds. The moment the door closed, the silence felt different. Not empty, but clean, free, like breathing after years underwater. Men, listen carefully. When you shame a woman for her body, you are telling her your love was never love, just approval disguised as attachment. Real partnership is not about maintaining perfection. It's about growing, changing, holding, learning. He tried reaching out later, text after text, call after call,